I'd like to thank you on behalf of Theology Formation Evangelism for your attendance and participation in this, the second Anti-Racism is a Spiritual Practice conversation. Although some of you may have been here before, the questions may be the same. We expect different responses because we all bring our full selves, our experiences, and all the intersectionalities that come with that. So I'm very excited to, in a moment, turn this over to Shanea, and I welcome Edwin and Marcia to be our panelists. I'd like to start with a technique called box breathing. Some of you may be aware of it. Every time I have a conversation, and also throughout the cohort, we're going to be introducing some grounding techniques because sometimes these conversations are difficult and they bring up difficult emotions and feelings. So I just want to give some simple techniques that people can use when they're dealing with these practices or when they're dealing with racism or really anything that causes any kind of discomfort or anxiety. Again, I always tell people, because I come from a therapeutic background, if you are experiencing anything that is very severe, like pain, or even extreme discomfort, you may want to seek a medical professional. This is not intended to keep you from having a heart attack. So if you would make yourself comfortable, you can fix, lower your gaze, or feel free to close your eyes, whichever is most comfortable. Take just a few cleansing breaths. And then we're going to do a technique called box breathing. The way box breathing works is that we're going to breathe in what's essentially a box. All of the breaths will be measured. I'm going to try not to make them too long. Maybe we'll do a count of 2 to start off and maybe increase to 3. So you would inhale, 1, 2, hold, 1, 2, exhale, 1, 2, hold, 1, 2. And we'll do it again. Inhale, 1, 2, hold, 1, 2, exhale, 1, 2, hold, 1, 2. One more time. Inhale, 1, 2, hold, 1, 2, exhale, 1, 2, hold, 1, 2. And you can increase that if you need to. I usually try to do like 4 if I'm really experiencing discomfort, just to really slow my heart rate down, get into that calm place. And so now, Shanea, if you'd like to start with prayer, so be it. If you'd like to get started however you see fit, I turn the session over to you. Thank you all for being with us.
Okay, thank you all. Thanks for asking me to do this, Alicia. I'm glad to be here with you and always glad to partner with TFE. I think everybody knows me, but if you don't, I am a Black Panther, or Shanea Leonard. I am a coordinator for gender and racial justice here at the PMA. My pronouns are they and them, and I'm so happy to be able to moderate this panel and engage in this discussion today. Let's start with the word of prayer. God, as you've called us into this centering and grounded space, we have gratitude for the offering of today. Gratitude for life, for strength, for the ability to function and think critically, theologically, and thoroughly about those things that are sin which so easily beset us, meaning racism. God, I pray that someone is touched or enlightened by this panel and this discussion. We pray for the ministry that should go forth from all of us to help build a more equitable and inclusive world and kingdom of God. In Christ's name we pray and am empowered. Amen. Amen. So, panel, would you like to introduce yourselves? We could start with Marcia. Hey, friend. And move on to Edwin. And are those our 2 panel members, right? Okay. So we'll start with Marcia and move to
Hello, everybody. Thank you for this invitation. I'm glad to be with you. I'm Marcia Mount Shoop, she, her pronouns. I'm the pastor, head of staff at Grace Covenant Presbyterian Church in Asheville, North Carolina. I've been here for about 6 years. I don't know if there's anything else, Shanea, that you want me to divulge about myself in my introduction.
But a scary question.
Within reason, I may oblige. So,
Well, would you like to say anything more about your connection to anti-racism work at all?
yeah. Well, this is my life's work, the work that I was born to do and called to do. At Grace Covenant, it's a particular focus for our community. It's really been, the last 6 years have been an opportunity to practice what it looks like to center the work of anti-racism and dismantling white supremacy in the life of a congregation. So it has changed and transformed everything we do as a church here at Grace Covenant. So I look forward to, whatever questions or ways that I can share some of those ways that the work, but it's where we are able to say that is kind of the organizing of how we practice beloved community.
Thank you, Marcia. You're breaking up just a little bit, I think.
Yeah. I'm going to go in another room because
Okay.
the internet in my office is terrible. So
Okay.
I
Yeah,
will.
you don't need internet at the pastor's office at
I
all.
know. Seriously. What's that all about?
Marcia is excellent. I'm so glad that she's here. We met almost 4 years ago, actually at an anti-racism training
That's
that
right.
Reverend Denise Anderson and myself were doing, and instantly I knew that this was someone I needed to know and had a wonderful spirit. So I'm so glad you're here today with us, Marcia.
Thank you.
Edwin, just in case anyone doesn't know, the incomparable, the well-known, the fantastic Edwin, please introduce yourself, please, Edwin González-Castillo.
Oh my God, you're setting the bar really high. Now I'm nervous, more nervous. Hi, everyone. My name is Edwin González-Castillo. I'm the Associate for Disaster Response for Latin America and the Caribbean for Presbyterian Disaster Assistance. Originally from Puerto Rico, from the territory of the United States in the Caribbean.
Tell the truth.
And to share a little bit, of course, part of my work has to do with a lot of communities that for many years have been treated in a colonialistic way, in many ways, from here from the United States, not only in the way that the government works with the communities and the countries that we provide assistance and that we partner with, but also the way that the churches and the leadership sometimes reaches out to them and the way that we work and spoke about them. Recently, we also have been working a lot with volunteers that go to do mission trips, but we are trying to change that language to volunteer work and partnership work, understanding that it's not just going to help those in need, it's going to learn from those who have so much to teach us about resilience and resistance and surviving in many situations, difficult situations. So glad to be here, glad to be able to participate in this conversation.
Excellent. Thank you so much. You all are going to give great perspective from your points of view on anti-racism. And so I'm so glad to have you here. And if necessary, I will figure out what the Black response is, because spoiler alert, I might be Black, just saying. But to start the conversation, and you all are welcome to join in as you feel led and as you feel comfortable. I just put the first question in the chat there for Edwin and Marcia, my friends, both of them. And it is, what is your belief or theology about all humanity? And then how does racism or race and white supremacy challenge that belief? So that's a two-parter to start us off. Thank you, Alicia. What is your theology about humanity, your belief about humanity? And then how does racism or race or white supremacy challenge that belief? And whoever like to go first, feel free.
Edwin, I'm happy to go first, or you can, whatever you
You're
want.
well, yeah, go ahead, don't worry.
Okay. Well, I love when we can start with theology. That feels really yummy. So my understanding of the human being is that we are made in the image of God, and that the image of God in us is our capacity to feel. And when I say feel, I don't mean emotion. I mean that we are these multi-layered beings that filter experience through our bodies, through our consciousness, through our imagination. So human beings are made to imagine. We're made to be creative. We are made as relational beings, related to all things, from stardust to the people around us to people we've never known. And I am a theologian, PhD in theology and all that. So I've thought a lot about this. So don't get me started, because I can talk about this stuff. But so for me, because our human beingness is that we're made to be creative, we're made to be relational. White supremacy and racism is a direct affront to our humanity, to our created nature. And because white supremacy and racism are bundled up with capitalism, I would say capitalism is the thing that gave birth to white supremacy. And capitalism commodifies our creativity, commodifies our body, commodifies our relationships. These are immediate distortions to just what we're created to be. And so for me, the work to dissolve and disintegrate white supremacy and the hold it has on us is the work of reclaiming our humanity, our shared humanity. Different bodies carry the charge of the way white supremacy destroys and distorts with different orders of magnitude, but we all are distorted. We all are diminished. So it's really about reclaiming the integrity of our ability to be collectives, to be community, to be to people that can even cultivate trustworthy spaces with each other. So I can't imagine as a minister doing any other work. I don't know what I'd be doing if I wasn't doing this, because it is the work of really healing human community.
I love that response. Thank you for the multifaceted response. I always say, just to kind of to tack on to that last part you said, I always say I want this on my tombstone, that there is no Jesus without justice. And so if your work,
Yes.
theologian, doesn't include some facet of justice work, then what are you really doing?
Mm-hmm.
I agree. Edwin, please feel free.
Well, for me, it's a tough question, because the view of humanity that I have, and I agree with Marcia, we are created in the image of God. The problem sometimes is that image of God has been distortion by so many that it's even difficult for us to have a clear understanding of what is God, of what it means. We of course assign a gender to God. We see him in the Bible, in the biblical text, as an old person, and we start with all this criteria, and we start to put God in our small boxes. And so for me, when we're talking about humanity, is in the sense of created in the image of God, is not my God, not your God, but the real God that is outside that box, that is not embedded to our ideas or cultures or views or even our biblical understanding of it. Because going around scripture and reading and finding Jesus calling God comparing God to a chicken who covers his chicks with his wings. It breaks our boxes. It breaks our imagination. It causes us to realize that humanity, in the sense of the children of God, it has so many colors, shapes, and wonderful ways to be expressed. So for me, that's my first thing. I cannot say this is humanity. I think we are challenged to discovering humanity in every person that we meet. To discover something new about humanity, about what is that, and what God is doing in all of our lives. The challenge, I've been reading a lot and seen a few documentaries about the conversations of how history has been erased by white supremacy and by the European culture and the US, and how much of our history of from Africa, from Middle East, has been erased and changed, and we have this concept that race began with white people, and that humanity began with white people, and lose so much connection with who we are, and what is the way that we have contributed to society and to everything that is around us. And one question that came from one of those conversations and documentaries was, if your mind was erased, if your memory was erased today, how can you provide, how can you be what could you do after that, and how much of a challenge it will be for you to be able to arise to who you are as a person if your memory for the last 10, 20, 30 years has been erased. And that's how we see history with races, with Latino culture, with Black culture, with people from the Middle East, from many other places where our history has been erased, our contribution to society has been erased, and it seems like we're starting again from zero. So I think that those are the ways that our humanity is being challenged and is being affected by all these conversations and movements of the culture from white people and from white communities to erase who we are as humanity.
That's such several good points. I love this panel. This panel is so intelligent. But the idea of, first of all, what is the image of God? What is that? What is the imago Dei? What is that really? Because if we're all created in the image of God and we're all so vastly different, how could the image even be this quote unquote cisgender heterosexual older white man? That's not my image. So what even is the image? I don't even see that image here. So what is the image of God necessarily? And then how does that get compromised by our own ideas around what racism looks like and how it feeds into the picture? I love what you're bringing up, Edwin, about how white supremacy culture centers whiteness as the rubric, as the it's the benchmark. It's what everything else is measured against. And so if it's not this, then it's wrong, it's erased, it doesn't matter, it's discounted. And that's a huge part of how we see God and faith, and how these three aspects of race, racism, and white supremacy culture influence it. I love that. And capitalism, if capitalism gives birth to white supremacy culture, as Marcia said, then white supremacy culture gives birth to racism. And so that means capitalism is the grandpappy or the grandmama of it all, or grandparent of it all. Non-binary. Hello. Next question. What calls you to the work of anti-racism? And you might have touched on this a little bit when you did your intros, but what is it that drives you to do this work? What is your passion around it? And like I said, you kind of already touched on this, but if you want to expand on it anymore, then we'll flip the script and start with Edwin this time. and then go to Marcia.
I think my own history, where I come from, my identity and my reality is part of the reason that calls me to this work. Especially in the last 5 years, living in Puerto Rico, you experience a different type of racism or situation, and you don't see it as common as here in the United States. Once I moved here, and I always remember the first interaction I have with a neighbor of mine was a person that came to my house to say, I want to meet my new neighbors, where are they? And they didn't think that I was the owner or the person living in that house, because I'm Latino and I was helping them, the person who were helping me with the move, with the boxes. So she thought that I was one of the movers, not a person. And when I introduced myself, she was perplexed that I was the new neighbor. And that was my first interaction with my neighbors. I was like, oh, okay, this is how we start. And it brought me to understand so many of the challenges and situations that our siblings here in the United States have to face constantly, with microaggressions, with comments, with the news, that also invited me or even challenged me to understand our relationship with other countries, with other people, with our communities, and how the use of our words have so much power on how we see people and how we understand our relationship with them. So that has contributed to the way that we work, and in PDA, when we relate to others, of being careful of using words as mission, or using words as I'm here to help you, or this savior complex that sometimes we have when we are a big part of the church that is providing assistance to others, or connecting with others. So that is what calls me to this work. Why it is important, because it's part of recognizing the other. It's part of recognizing God in the other person. It's part of that justice that you mentioned before. If we serve Jesus, if we recognize, if we are a Christian church, there's no way that we can be called Christians and not recognize justice, not recognize equality, not recognize our call to be ambassadors of that justice of God in our world. So that is part of that. And how our ministry has worked, I think, in the conversations, in the relation, I think everything, and Marcia mentioned it before when she was talking about humanity. I think relationship is so important, and it starts there. It starts when how we relate to one another, and it starts with listening, with having honest conversations, recognizing when you don't know something, and when you need to process information and to learn. And Shanea, you and I have had these conversations many times when I reached out to you and I said, this has been difficult for me, not because I don't support it or I don't believe on it, because it's not part of my culture or what have you. So I need to learn, and I ask the questions with respect. And I think that's the way we do it with everyone, with our communities that we work with, is opening our ears and our hearts to those voices that have so much to teach us, before we try to go do something for them or with them.
Yeah, I one of the things that I don't miss much about being in the building, let me be clear, because as you see, I'm perfectly comfortable here on the couch. However, I do miss our conversations and our coffee time, Edwin, because those are one of the enriching things about being in community with one another. Before Marcia gets her answer, I want to ask you a follow-up question, if you don't mind going a little bit deeper, because we always think of racism, how it exists between white folks and POC, people of color, but there's another level of discrimination that happens with people of color. And so I'm wondering, if you talk about, your experiences in the colony of Puerto Rico versus here in the US and what that looks like. What did it look like for you, or how did you see it, experience it, or witness what colorism or racism might have looked like at home?
Well, I experienced it from the other side. It was the person who participated in meetings or worship service, or was a pastor in Puerto Rico and read the articles and the information sent from the church here in the United States, and read it from the perspective of the Latino who says, this doesn't connect with me. That's one way. Of course, in Puerto Rico, there's a different way of experiencing discrimination. It has to do with money, it has to do with power. Puerto Rico hasn't have a person with my tone of skin or darker as a governor or in a leadership role in his entire life. So that contributed to that mentality. Until recently, the census in Puerto Rico, 80% of Puerto Ricans were white in the census. And that, if you have ever been in Puerto Rico, you know there's no way that's true. But it's because that mentality, you know, we in the Caribbean and Latin America, and you see it now with governments and the way in Brazil and many other Central American people who have been elected recently, is because we copy so much from the United States. And things tends to become part of our reality. And one of those things is believing that white people are better, that white people are more intelligent, that white people are the ones who are superior. And that has come to the reality of seeing it in Puerto Rico with the governmental, the politics in Puerto Rico, where is white people in control. They're Latinos, but their color of the skin is a lot whiter, and they don't come from the same neighborhoods as many of the people who vote for them. So we face that reality in our lands. Part of it is because we have copied that same mentality and have bought into that idea and that way of thinking that white people are better than any others.
Yeah, that is so true, and it's not just in Latinx and Hispanic places with people of those racial ethnic origins, but it happens in Asia too, right? You know, the idea of people from Indians from India and different colorism that exists there, and this idea how white supremacy culture has permeated in various places of people from the global South around the world. That influence, I'm glad, thank you for bringing it out, because that's what I want to get to, like how that has influenced us. And then even, you know, the deeper dive of that, Marcia, I'm coming, but the deeper dive of that is also, how is the church culpable in this work of pushing and this narrative and influencing how that looks? So yeah, thank you for bringing that out, Edwin, because we could go even deeper with that. Marcia, what draws you to this work that you haven't mentioned already, or how would you like to jump into conversation? Feel free, because it's gone a couple different ways.
Yeah, well, I thought you were just going to toss me the football when you said, how's the church culpable? I thought that
works too.
I was like, okay, I'll take that. Okay.
Actually, that's perfect. You take that.
Okay, I got it. I caught that ball. All right. I feel like the Christian church in many of its iterations has been the lead in how white supremacy has not just been an economy or a politic, but it has been a whole way, a whole cosmology, a whole ontology. The church has taken white supremacy and given it and deified it, basically. So sometimes when I get up in the morning and say, now, why do I work in a church again? Why is this what we're doing, Jesus? Please tell me. I realize, like, this is ground zero.
Yeah.
this is ground zero where, and that's why it's so hard in churches to root this up, because it's so tangled up with our beliefs, right? About God and about each other and about what it means to be a virtuous person and about what it means to save the world, or whatever the language is that you have been given in your church. And church is really the entity that made white supremacy a virtue. And Presbyterians have had a big role in that, especially in the United States. We have been the professionals. We have been the lawyers, the doctors, the professors, the seminaries, the educators, the one who built colleges, the one who built universities, and all of those things. Sorry.
I said, and plantations.
And plantations. And in our seminaries and our universities, we taught people how to run plantations. So the depth to which the Presbyterian Church, the Christian Church, has made white supremacy just kind of collapse into normativity is withering at times. So I'm called to this work in the church because I feel like this is the place where we can start to disentangle what it means to be a person of faith from what it means to be white. And I think a lot of what I see in the work of the church is a lot of reactivity to that. It's almost like we're taking off people's skin or organs out, and it's just like people are so, it's hard to kind of separate yourself when something's been so immediate to the way you understand yourself and the world. The church that I'm currently working in, as I said, we've really centered these questions. My first sermon here was the Sunday after González-Castillo was shot and killed by police. And I scrapped my sermon that I had for my first sermon ever here. And I said, we're going to talk about white supremacy. And we have never stopped. For 6 years, we have not stopped. And some people have struggled with that. Some people have just felt like they could finally breathe, that we're talking about this, that we're dealing with it. So for me, I feel like there's a lot of ways I could go with how the ministry has systematically supported the work. I could also go a lot of ways with the way it's challenged the work, but I want to talk about a few ways that we've centered the work. And that would be, first of all, I want to say we've looked kind of how we practice being an antidote to some of the ways white supremacy shows up as normativity or virtue. And so one of them is in our habit in the Presbyterian Church of debating, or seeing that there are two sides to everything. We said, no two sides. No, we're doing away with that whole idea of debate, the whole idea of the binary. And we try to, instead, when we're together in discerning spaces, we try to really share power and not create this kind of, are you on this side or this side, but just have more of a watershed, like everybody gets to talk. We have practices where we don't interrupt or whatever. We have different practices that we use, but all of our meetings are practices around sharing power. So that antidote to that power hoarding, or the way our polity can be weaponized to kind of create a false sense of, well, everybody agrees on this, right? So let's do it. And when you don't center debate, but you center the practice of sharing power and everybody being heard, or everybody at least having an opportunity to be heard, you start to realize we don't all see this the same way. And so it slows everything down. It creates like an ongoing conversation, like this isn't going to be done tonight. We're all going to sit with it for a while. We're going to come back to it or whatever. So the first is in kind of our mode of discernment. The second one that I would share is in our way of understanding our resources as a community. When I got here, this church was a pretty traditional, although progressive Presbyterian church that liked the idea of how generous it was. You know, we give a lot of charity, we do a lot of giving. We do a lot of I mean, it was white saviorism, you know, on you know, a piecemeal basis. It's not like we had a lot of money, but we were giving money to a lot of organizations, and that made us feel really good. We like to tell everybody about that. So we've moved away from that kind of charity model toward more of a partnership model. And we also then started centering questions of reparation and repair. And so we've gone from a kind of charitable model to a grant giving model to now a deep partnership model in which all of our partners now are Black-led community organizations. And so we are focused more on relationship building than transactions. And our resources aren't just a check, it's our building. We have a few of our community partners, our covenant partners is what we call them, are fiscal sponsorees of Grace Covenant now. So they get paid through our payroll. One of them's even on the board of pensions now. They use, you know, our staff is their staff kind of thing. So these partnerships get deeper and deeper, and the lines in our budget kind of start to blur as to what, you know, how we are building these partnerships. It's not just our mission giving, but it's our whole budget as a moral document that we're thinking in terms of repair and relationship building. And the other one, I would say, the third one I would say of how we've supported the work is that there is in white dominant spaces a necessity that that this is also inner work for white people, that it has to be a kind of personal commitment, a personal journey to look at how white supremacy is literally in our cells, in our muscle twitches, our instincts, our reactions to things, the filters that we use. So we have this, you know, kind of multiple ongoing kind of work, and different people are at different levels, but we have accountability partners for some folks. We have, I'm doing a class right now on Revelation, and we're kind of practicing some different ways to be together that doesn't tell everybody in the room they have to override their emotions, but to kind of let those be present in the room. We have classes on different things, but it's not just in our head. I preach sermons on this. We're doing different things in our worship spaces. So the work of kind of uprooting the way white supremacy lives in our bodies, and particularly calling white-bodied folks into that, what I call is deprogramming or detoxing from the way that whiteness has told us certain things about the way we need to be people of faith. So that's a lot. That was a big answer. Blah. There you go.
I appreciate, first of all, I can't say enough about how wonderful I think both of you are. And your opinions and perspectives are really taking this conversation in a way I feel like it really needed to go. And so I appreciate it. I wish more folks knew about what you were doing down in North Carolina, because there's some good work happening down there. So I want to make sure that that's highlighted again. I want to give space, because Edwin and Marcia have said a lot right now. So I'm going to pause just for a second before I move on to some other questions I have to talk about, to ask if anybody has any questions for these two fantastic Presbyterians, these reverends, these pastors, these friends, these glasses wearers. I love the idea of how you're engaging this in a variety of ways in your work, Marcia, and in the work that you're doing with PDA, Edwin. Even you talked about how you use language. Decolonizing language is super important, and we don't talk enough about what that means, and how we're all, everybody on the screen. Let me be clear. This is what I do talk about in the workshops that I do. That we're all victims of white supremacy culture. Each one of us. I don't care what you are, and how you associate yourself with race and ethnic origin and background and identity. We all suffer from it, whether it gives you a false sense of self, in either way, either inflated or conflated, in either way. And so we're all victims of it. And so this idea, this process of deprogramming ourselves and decolonizing ourselves is something we all have to do. I was doing a podcast yesterday, and I mentioned on that podcast, I changed my preaching style when I know that I'm preaching at a predominantly white church. That's right there. It's me being a victim of white supremacy culture and doing it to myself. Like, I perpetuated on myself. And so that's why I say racism is the most powerful sin ever, because I don't even need nobody else to do it. I can do it to myself. And so, that idea of how we deprogram or work it out that we aren't constantly victims or constantly moving in that vein is a lifelong process, especially if you live in the United States, because it's everywhere. It's a part of us. And so I'm wondering, Edwin and Marcia, who and what influences you, or who are your role models, past, present, and future in this work? What influences your commitment? Like, who are your heroes? Who are the people you follow? Who are the people that make you do what you want to do? Either one of
Okay, I can mention for me, and I've been reading a lot about him, and it's a person from Puerto Rico. His name is Pedro Albizu Campos, and Pedro Albizu Campos was a nationalist in Puerto Rico. He was a Harvard student. He graduated from law in Harvard, and he was Black, and he was from Puerto Rico and born in Puerto Rico, and he was one of those who welcomed the United States when they arrived. And there was a situation with him during a time that he wanted to meet with a president here of the United States, and his work with he was in favor of the United States, actually, one moment being and for Puerto Rico being part of the United States. But he had a trip from Florida to Boston, and he saw the reality of a Black person, and through Mississippi, through many of those states, and he changed completely his mind. He went from a pro-statehood person to a person who said, no, we cannot be part of this. This is not our reality. And to hear his story, to hear the work he did with the communities, his message, he fought for so many people, has been always an inspiration for me about that we need to experience the reality of the other, and we need to understand the reality of the other, and it's not just what is being sold to us by books or stories or movies or politicians. And his story is amazing. All the challenges that he faced as a Puerto Rican, as a Black person. He hold the highest grade, but they didn't give him the last 2 exams, so he didn't graduate in that year, so he couldn't become the valedictorian. His challenges with the FBI persecuting him in Puerto Rico for his political views, but everything that he accomplished, and for me, that's one of the people that I look up to. And of course, I'm not a sport player, but Roberto Clemente has always been a person that I look up in the way of him acting with the other, and so humble, but at the same so powerful in the way that he treated others. So yeah, those are for me. And let me mention this, which is gonna sound that I'm sucking up to you, Shanea, but for me, Denise, Tanya, Denise, and you, and Carlton, and so many others that I have met during my time in PDA and my work, and that you mentioned the coffee hours and other moments. We in while living in Puerto Rico, you get to hear, you get to read a little bit, but it's not our reality. We have so many other issues going on that sometimes, and I think it's part of that agenda of dividing us, because we have our own fights that we need to have, and it's not sometimes until we move here or we have other conversations with other people and we start to listen to other people, like you and Dennis and Alonso, that we discover a new reality of the challenges that the Black community is facing and that the other communities are facing too. So for me, that for me has been important in this process of learning and relearning about our realities.
Well, I appreciate that. You know, when I was growing up in Puerto Rico, I remember how challenging it was for me. And then I got adopted here in the United States by some Black people. And I appreciate you always connecting me to my
You're
heritage.
gonna confuse so many people.
Marcia, and thank you, Edwin. That was really sweet of you. I appreciate that. On behalf of all the people you mentioned, Alonzo, Carlton, and Denise, myself.
Yeah, I really resonate with what Edwin is saying about colleagues in the PCUSA. I mean, I've been doing this work for 30 years now as an adult in the Presbyterian Church, and that there's been such a centrality to my colleagues in the PCUSA, especially my colleagues who are people of color. Back in the day, we were the Presbyterian Multicultural Network, which was, that's all passe language I get, except for maybe Presbyterian. I don't know. But, it was me and James Lee and Jake Kim, who has now passed on, and people like that, those collectives that we were, Magdalena Garcia, we were together, we were working, we were trying to find our way into what it meant to do this work in a white dominant denomination. And those colleagues, they're my dearest friends and kind of kindred spirits. And Shanea and Denise and Jay Herbert and, so many people now that and I've been known Jay Herbert for a long time, but just that community of believers that are trying to function in a Presbyterian framework and cultivate this really living, embodied expression of what it means to be beloved community that takes into account the harm that white supremacy does. And then I would say, so it's my colleagues, PCUSA colleagues, but it's also some emerging like prophets and prophetesses that are in the larger culture. I really appreciate some of the emergent folks that are speaking into these situations, like Sonia Renee Taylor and Adrienne Marie Brown, folks like that are doing really amazing, creative, beautiful stuff around bodies and revolutionary love and healing and, radical permission and things like that, to just really give people space to love themselves and to love each other in a revolutionary way. And I also want to name my ancestors, as flawed as they are. They gave me this heritage of somebody who's troubled, even to the point of protest, troubled. My ancestors are protesters. They were protesting different things. They were French Huguenots. They were, you know, all in different kind of Northern European situations, but standing up to abuses of power. And so that is a part of my DNA. And sometimes I'm sad that my ancestors and angry at my ancestors for not doing more or for some things that they did. But I also know that they gave me a certain degree of fearlessness, a certain degree of like, screw it, I'm doing it, I'm saying it, this is wrong. And I don't care if you don't like me because I said it, I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And so I want to say I'm thankful for the genes that I have in my body that tell me not to shut up and not to just want to go along to get along. So.
Yeah, thankful for the genes in our bodies, on our bodies. Amen. I appreciate what both of you are saying. I'm gonna go a little bit off script here, Alicia, as I've already been doing, but nobody knows, so it's okay. Right. I mean, some of the folks that have influenced me, I agree with you, have been like my grandmother and you know, women, Black folks who have just, you know, in the face of all odds, have stayed true to themselves and still lifted the community in ways that weren't out there protesting and weren't in front, but were in the background holding things together. And I appreciate that, but I also appreciate the influence of folks like Mother Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks, who taught me not just a theological, a sociological framework for how to encounter race and gender that has helped push me and propel me in ways that will never leave my life and my identity. And so I think about not necessarily one of my go-to folks who have influenced me, but I think about King, and I'm about to tie it together. Watch, I'm a preacher. I'm gonna listen to him. I think about King, and King's influence in retrospect is phenomenal, right? None of us can argue that. But in King's tenure, the church did not support him. He was not supported, especially particularly by folks that look like him, for the work that he did. And so my question to you all is, as you do the work of anti-racism in your own particular context and in your own particular way, have you experienced pushback? Have you experienced opposition from folks that look like you or from your own particular place in life? And what does that look like for you, and how have you dealt with that currently or in the past?
Yes.
Definitely.
If it's okay with Edwin, I'll answer that quickly. And this doesn't need to be therapy. I'm okay, y'all. I'm okay, I promise. But one of the things that I am seeing the most as the way resistance gets expressed in a progressive church that really doesn't want to say the things, like they don't want to say what's really bothering them. They'd rather say, you know, I just don't feel at home here anymore, you know, or something like that. But what I'm seeing is that the dynamic of what is called white aversive behavior. And that is that when white people start to see more people of color in the room, start to feel like the norms shifting, and they don't feel the same sense of competency or power or ability to manipulate and control what's going on, they start to display aversive behaviors. And in churches, that takes shape in a lot of ways. Sometimes it can be passive aggressive, kind of like, you know, creating little cabals of people that are going to try to mess with things. Sometimes it's like, well, I'm not going to give to the church anymore. We're not going to pledge anymore. We're just not happy with the way things are going. Well, what are you not happy with? Well, it just doesn't feel the same. It's not the same. Does this have anything to do with that a Black woman preached 7 times while I was on sabbatical here? Oh, no, I loved her. She was great. Well, nothing else has really changed since I left. So I wonder why you're doing this now. Well, something just doesn't feel right, you know. Or it can take the shape of just vacating White aversive behavior can be just avoidance, aversion, repulsion. Like, I'm not showing up in that space anymore. I can't do it. It's too much. I don't understand. It's upsetting. I'm stressed out, or whatever it is. And I think white aversive behavior is contagious sometimes in white spaces. In other words, some people who may not have felt an aversion to transformative work, they start to get nervous and anxious when they see other white people leaving or other white people getting upset. Especially when white men start to get upset, everybody starts shuffling around to try to comfort them. There's just this kind of long history of when the white men get upset, people get hurt. So let's all get them clamped down. And also when white women get upset, bad things happen too. So let's start to calm it so they're not upset, because we should be scared if they're upset. So that white aversive behavior, it has to be called out. It has to be called in. There has to be this kind of multi-pronged approach to kind of not letting it, kind of be the sludge in the engine, like where you just stop moving. And it takes a lot of courage in some spaces to just say, people leave sometimes. Thanks for letting me know. And that can be tough, but it's so important. It's so important to have that framework of white aversion, because otherwise you can start to take things personally and think something's really wrong. But when you have that framework of aversive behavior, like, oh, there it is. Okay, again. Yeah, there it is. Look how that just happened. And it's a helpful framework for our session to kind of start to think of things in those terms sometimes too. So I wanted to name that for sure.
I appreciate you naming that, because that's important. And it's important that it comes from you naming it versus someone that looks like me naming it or looks like Edwin naming it. That makes a world of difference. One of the things that my office is focused on going forward for next year, and we're starting this year, is to build, and you're already going to get an email about this, and so are you, Andrew. I see you on here. And probably you too, Rebecca. It's about building this network of white folks to talk to white folks about racism. That's one of the key components of the next level of work that I'm doing in my office, because has heard totally different. But I know also you experience that aversion in ways, and you have a way of calling it out in ways that won't be received if I do it. And so I appreciate you bringing that up. Edwin, please jump into the conversation, brother.
Yeah, definitely. The answer is yes. I have experienced it not only from white people, but also sometimes from our own culture, our own people. Let me mention this, and it goes back to what I mentioned before. I think having in some ways different struggles, they're at the end are the same struggles, are the same difficulties. Is white supremacy with a different, we say in Puerto Rico is the same dog with a different color, but it's the same issues, but fought from different areas. And so we don't see it, we don't connect the dots. And for me, it was the same way. When I came to the United States, it was difficult, some of the conversations, not because I didn't believe in it, but because I didn't see it that way until I had those conversations, until I had meetings, until I read, until I experienced it by myself. And then I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, this is real. It's not just this person being too sensitive. This is a reality that is felt here. So I understand when I have those conversations with my friends and other people and other people from Puerto Rico and other, where they're still pushing back. Part of it is because, and let me give you this example. For a community that receives funds from PCUSA, they're not going to say anything bad about the white people who give them money.
That part.
So it's difficult to start those conversations because they're we don't want to get into those topics. And it takes time. And sometimes those conversations happen with a coffee table and not in the meeting where the white people were sitting. And then comes the truth and comes the real feelings. But yeah, it's sometimes there's a few pushback from people who have experienced it in a different way or who are not connecting the dots. When we start connecting the dots and saying, well, money can be a way of controlling people. Politics in our country, when we call it, we call it colonialism, but it's racism too. It has to do a lot with racism. When you read books about the history of the relationship with the United States and Puerto Rico, and they say, well, Puerto Rico is a beautiful place, we just need to get rid of the people. You discover that there's racism there. And so that's one. On the other side, with white friends and white colleagues and white people around, I'm a member of a church. I go to a church here in Louisville, and they don't like to be confronted sometimes. They don't like to hear the reality. They ask, how are you doing? And when you're trying to explain they are expecting the short answer of, oh, good, and you. They're not expecting the answer of, well, this is what just happened, or this is what you just said that offended me or made me feel this way. And they go to their, oh, I'm sorry, or I didn't mean it, but yeah, you meant it, or yes, you don't like it. You don't like to be confronted with who your history or your reality or what are you doing. So it manifests in different ways. That reality of not wanting to be confronted with that horrible word for some people of racism. No, and racism manifests in so many ways that for some people it's easy to just think it's just a joke, it's just a comment, it's just a phrase. I didn't mean this, but yes, you meant it, and so it's difficult. People prefer not to have the conversation or not to engage in that conversation just to avoid that feeling of I'm being accused or I'm being signaled. And it happens everywhere. It happens in the building, and I have mentioned it several times when we have conversations about this. We have colleagues in the building that their only interaction with a person of color is in the building. And that is and it's not just I'm thinking that happens. I have heard it from colleagues who have said, no, I don't my friends where I buy groceries. So there's pushback because they're there to do a job, and that's it. They're not there to be confronted with what is really happening around their communities and in their own lives.
Well, you know what? I wonder, and you're 100% right. And I wonder how many people that I'm their token queer friend and their token Black friend. I think that there's a couple of people that's true for. But I wonder, and we're moving toward the question of spiritual practices. But I want to ask you both, from your perspective, a question that I've been asked before, and I can answer too. But when did you realize that you were Latino? When did you know you were white? When was that point in your history that this came out? And please give good answers. The boss is here. The associate director at TFE is in the building. So I feel like the boss is here now. So give good answers, because Catherine's in the room. I'm teasing. But when did you realize you were how you are socialized?
Oh,
And
wow.
I can start if you want to take a minute to think about it. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I remember I grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood. My school that I went to when I was doing elementary and middle school was predominantly Black, not all Black. My best friend was biracial. But the first time I really realized that something was different about me is I remember going to Disney World with my family. And I remember my father was the type of person that we got up at dark 30 and spent the whole day at the park till from Kansas City to Kansas City. And I remember after Disney World that night, we went to Denny's. And this was back when Denny's was about to get hit with that lawsuit about racism, for those of you who remember. And we walked in and no one greeted us. No one said anything for about 10, 15 minutes. And then when they finally sat us, they sat us like way in the back and they told us, oh, well, the kitchen, there's no hot food in the kitchen. They wouldn't give us no hot food. And then a white family came in right after that. And the white family got like mashed potatoes and Salisbury steak and all this kind of thing. And my mom lost it. She went off because it was blatant racism. And then it was a few years after that Denny's, for those of you who remember, got hit with this big lawsuit about how they had racist practices across the country. And I was like, we're going to get paid. And we did not. But that's the first time I remember as a child encountering the fact that something was not only different about me from other people, but also that some people thought something was wrong with who I was. And so that's the first time I remember really realizing and recognizing being Black. Anyone else? Marcia, Edwin?
Wow. Wow. Let me mention, I'm trying to go back. I'm trying to go back in memory, trying to think about the answer. I think, and it's sad to say that it has to do with church.
That's real.
This is the thing. I come from a humble family, a real poor family. We only traveled because it was needed. It was not because of fun. And in one of those cases, I think the reason that I traveled to was because of PCUSA and was when I was a member of the committees and things like that. And that's when, because you experience a different reality in Puerto Rico, as I mentioned before. There's racism. My mother is from Dominican Republic. So when I was a kid, I tried to hide the accent because Puerto Ricans and Dominicans have different accents and we know each other. And when you have a Dominican accent, people think you're dumb and people think you're from Dominican. So there's those stereotypes. But when I came to meetings here and I hear people saying, oh, you speak English very well. And I'm like, oh, I'm not supposed to. Or other questions or other comments, or how are the villages in Puerto Rico and things that's when you start to hit, wait, what is this? And yeah, that those are the moments with some of the comments and some of the interactions. And when you participate in a meeting here or an event and you look at your color of the skin or the accent and your conversations and the way things happen, and you realize, wow, I don't feel connected to any of these people. And in the sense of their reality is not my reality, or I don't feel represented in this group of people. And that's, I think, when that view of who I am and where I'm from came to be more central in my life and more important to understand. And meetings where people try, because I was the only Latino on that table, to think that I spoke for all the Mexicans or all, and realizing no, I represent myself and that's it. And I cannot speak on behalf of every Latino, of every culture. Everyone is so different, and we are so, and that confronts you to start thinking of who you are and who you are in this table and who you are in this community and who you are in this country, and being careful of your words and actions. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
So I feel like it's what I feel like I've always been aware of being white, because I happened to be born in a family that was very justice oriented. So it was what I attached to that whiteness that has changed. So, in other words, I think I was born into a situation where there was an awareness, a social consciousness. And so we talked about as a family, you know, my dad was the only white person in the NAACP in Danville, Kentucky. You know, there was a critical consciousness about racial injustice. But it wasn't until my adult life that I started to realize what whiteness is and what it does, and what it had done to me. And I would say that in, you know, maybe 30 years ago, it was more kind of critical race theory and kind of studying the anatomy of racism that sort of like helped to raise my awareness of the way it's baked in systems. But really, I feel like the conversation, the collectives around the contours, the character traits, the internalization of white supremacy and anti-Blackness, that's been something that has really been more live for me probably in the last 15 years, and largely because of the colleagues and communities that I've been a part of that have really created some language around those things enough so that we can actually do the work of that, of, like I said, that kind of shedding, the kind of deprogramming. There's so much great conversation and collective kind of coming around, like how we see whiteness, you know, making it visible. I think of Shakti Butler. I want to raise her name up. Shakti Butler out in Berkeley, California. She and her documentary films, she's been a huge influence in my ability to see whiteness, to see it at work, to see it as something, to see it as a culture, to even see that I have a culture, you know, to kind of rent me away from just this, well, that's just normal, you know, kind of thing. And so I would say Shakti Butler came into my life probably about 25 years ago, somebody that gave me a way to look at my experience, my life, with a different perspective, a way to see myself as a participant in a different way. So it's kind of, for me, it's not as much about realizing I'm white as it is realizing, oh, what does it mean to be white? Okay, and I'm getting that now. I'm getting that now in a different way than I did.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And then shout out to Pastor Kamal Hassan is on here, who's a pastor out in the San Francisco Bay Area who does a lot of justice work himself. He's the pastor Sojourner Truth Presbyterian.
Mm-hmm.
And so you mentioned someone from the West Coast and from California.
Yeah.
Glad to have him on here, who is more of an influence on my life than he realizes. So I appreciate that. One of the questions that Alicia has telling me to raise, because she's the boss right now, is what you all talking about. When was the first time I asked that question about the first time you realized your racial ethnic socializing? And I'm wondering what that impact has had on you in your life, is the question that, or your ministry. Has that had an impact on your life and ministry, and even your interactions with others? And some of that you probably already addressed, but just to kind of ask it in a direct, straightforward question, because my next question, and probably one of my last questions, is going to be about, you know, anti-racism work is difficult on you emotionally, mentally, spiritually, in all the ways. And Marcia, I shout out to you for talking about that idea of bringing together our bodies with our minds, because that's exactly where I'm at these days and how that looks in justice work. But we're going to talk about what your spiritual practices are. around anti-racism work, and how do you take care of yourself? And so, just in case you got lost, 2 questions. One, realizing who you are and how you fit into the ethos of this country. How has that impacted you personally and professionally? And then 2, what are your spiritual practices around doing anti-racism work or just existing in this sometimes often hell of racism we live in?
Edwin, do you want to go or do you want me to go?
You can go first. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so the first question is how doing this work has impacted me personally. Is that right, Shanea? Okay. It's changed my whole life. It's changed everything about the way that I live out my days. It's changed my relationship to my past and my present and my future. A very concrete way it has affected my life is, some of you know, my husband was a professional football coach for 26 years in the NFL and Division I college football. And it was really the work I was doing in anti-racism that made me kind of provoke some questions in our family and in some of his workplaces that cost him his job. Twice. And we made the decision as a family to leave college football because of how exploitive it was. And because of how we realized it was just a true kind of carrier of these systems that are set up for white people to benefit from the unpaid labor of mostly Black bodies. So that was a huge shift for our family. It was a huge financial shift for our family. I would say another place where it's really changed my relationship to my whole identity is around the ways I've understood, come to learn and understand the way white supremacy is baked into higher education. That's been I grew up as a professor's kid. Both my parents were college professors. And the world of the academy and learning and having degrees and all that just felt, that was always like, that's what we want everybody to get to do, is go to college and get degrees and all those things. And when I realized like how much that had taught me to be a white person, and how much that had taught me to be a person who moved in ways that were really about white supremacy. When I started to realize that, like that's the kind of family business, church and the academy, how much those two institutions are carriers of whiteness, it really changed my whole self-understanding. My whole understanding of my family, respectability, virtue, health, wellness. So there's a lot more I could say, but I would just say there's no way for me to overstate the radical nature in which my life has been changed.
That's powerful. Thank you for that, Marcia. Edwin, same question.
I think it has affected in a positive way in many ways our ministries and the way that we interact with others. Something as simple as this, as being here today. 5 years, 6 years, 7 years ago, I probably would have said, I'm not sure I am able to talk about this or not feel comfortable talking about this in that moment. I still don't many times because it's a learning process. But I think it affects our ministries in the sense that we start to see it's gonna sound weird. It's like the Matrix. It's discovering that there's another word, that there's another thing behind what we thought or what we think is real, and decolonizing our thoughts and relearning what those words and what those comments and what's those decisions that are being made by our church and by our governments, and how they have multiple impacts on our communities. It changes. You cannot go back. You cannot see things the same way once you have conversations with people who have experienced the trauma of white supremacy and racism. And if going back to the first question, if you're a Christian, you feel the need that you need to do something, that things cannot stay the same, that there has to be a change. So in our work and the way that we relate with partners outside the United States, it confronts us on what are we doing and how we are doing it. And is this a respectful and humanifying and dignifying way of relating with one another? Discovering that money, the color of a dollar might be green, but it's really white in so many places. And that we have to be careful on how, and Villanueva on his book about decolonizing wealth presented so many ways of how we have a lot of power with the money that we have. And we're a powerful church with a lot of money. And sometimes we have used that power or that money that we have to establish our own views and our own mentality of supremacy in so many places. So yeah, it definitely has influenced my work in the conversations and even around the building and meetings and other places where I just cannot keep quiet. There's if it's either keeping quiet, if either talking or just leaving, because both cannot stay. And that of course is difficult, like Marcia was saying, because it means confronting people who think they're doing the job or the good job, or they're doing the right thing, but underneath there's that culture, that supremacy, white racist culture that continues to dominate our way of being a church.
Wow, this discussion is a whole workshop within itself. And so I'm grateful for you all. In our last 4 minutes, I want to just ask you all, once again, your spiritual practice, how do you hold it together? What is your practice for maintaining your own sanity, mental and emotional well-being, in the midst of the challenging ways that humanity shows up in not so nice ways sometimes? And so what do you do to keep it together besides a glass of wine?
It's hard sometimes. Sometimes I don't know that I'm keeping it together, but I was on sabbatical this summer. That helped. I certainly considered becoming a permanent hermit. That was definitely on my list of possible career changes, but I did come back. But for me, the kind of daily attention to my body, like just how much this stuff just gets stuck. Oh, it can just block. It creates all kinds of blockages. It creates disease. It creates lethargy. It activates us. It does all of these things. So I'm really trying to be more attentive to moving. I get up and go outside as much as I can and take a walk, even if it's just walking around the block for a minute. And also just really continuing to do that self-talk to myself of like, I'm not going to abandon you, inner self, that knows this is the right thing to be doing, that this is the work. And I'm not going to abandon you and that inner voice that says, you know, this isn't okay, that this is where this conversation's going, you know. I also, one of the things that's really been helping me lately is two things. Poetry. I've been writing a lot of poetry. I've been reading a lot of poetry. There's just like something to those incomplete sentences and suggestions, and just like it comes from a visceral place. And it feels like a watershed. It feels like a way that I'm processing that this is so deep. This is ancestral. This is primal. This is the soil. This is all of it. And then I started running again last year in November. I was a competitive runner in college, and then was like, I'm done with that because that hurts. I'm not doing that anymore. So I'm a lot slower now, but I am running some, and it is really helping me. I just get out there and I take my anger and all of the frustration, and I just like, it just is really helping me flush and flush it out so I can get back in there. I would say a lot of my spiritual practice right now is very visceral, very embodied. So
That's great. I love it. That's part of what I'm doing is really reconciling what it means to be not just heady all the time, but in being in our bodies and that connection between mind, body, and soul, spirit. So thank you for that. Edwin.
I think one of the silver linings of the pandemic has been able to hear friends and pastors from other places that I couldn't attend to their worship because they're either in another country or in different times, and being able to listen to other people's messages, not just I go to a white church here, and I work with a white church, so being able to listen to friends in my own language, that has helped. Also disconnecting, sometimes just disconnecting and sharing time and spending time with friends who enrich your lives with different ways and engage you in a different perspective. I think for me that has helped. I wish I could say I'm reading more, but that has been difficult. I started seeing books 3 or 4 times because it's just, so I'm starting to listen more. I'm starting to download audiobooks that help. One person that has helped me a lot is Father Boyle from Homeboys Industries, and I hear sometimes I hear the same book just because it's refreshing. The stories, it's refreshing the way that he presents God in more humane way. So that has helped. And also sharing my feelings. I think sometimes as pastors and leaders, it's difficult to find people who can understand what you're going through, and when you want to just criticize God and talk about some of the actions that God has taken and some of the things that you feel that are being allowed to happen, and just being able to share with people who are not there to criticize you, but here there to just listen to you and to help you go through it. And that for me has been important and helpful, to be able to share what I feel with others, and not expecting a theology defense, but just someone who understands and is there.
That's huge. That's so huge. I always say my closest friend, my best friend, doesn't go to church regularly, is not a pastor, has nothing to do with my work, and I often have to explain it to her. But that's on purpose. Number one, because we've been friends from high school, but also to have that different perspective is super important, especially with all that we go through. I am going to stop here. Alicia, I don't know if you're going to open it up for any questions from other folks who are here, but I'm going to turn it back over to you. I want to thank Marcia and Edwin, my friends. You know your friends are there in your phone. So my friends, for being here and being so freaking amazing and thoughtful and theological and dope and awesome and all the adjectives that describes who they are. I appreciate their perspectives from different parts of life, but still doing the work of being authentically themselves and doing the work of building a kingdom of God. So thank you. So, Alicia.
Thank you so much, Marcia. Thank you so much, Edwin. And thank you so much, Shanea. Oh my goodness. I was taking so many notes, I could not even pay attention to where we were with questions. So Shanea, thank you again for putting those in the chat. And the off scripts were just as amazing, if not more than the on scripts. I'm mindful of time, so I'm not sure if Edwin or Marcia have any more moments to be with us. But if there is a burning question that you would like to ask, please unmute yourself and hop in. I am seeing none. So everybody is probably just as like, oh my goodness, the information was so like, I feel like I need to go back over this again and again and again and again. So in that light, I do need to put something in the chat if I am coherent enough, because I am just so filled that I'm like, whew.
Can I say one thing?
Please.
This is, I mean, I was waiting for Catherine to do it, but I'll do it because this is a great time to plug that evangelism conference, because we're talking about moving from harm to hope, and literally what we've been talking about in this discussion. So if you did not know about it, didn't plan to come to the conference and the immersion experience afterwards, now's your time to really go to that website, look it up. October 30th through November 2nd, there are two fabulous things going on. There's the evangelism conference. I hear the keynote speaker is going to be amazing. And then there's the immersion experience afterwards, being led by my son, Carlton Johnson. So you want to make sure that you come to both of those experiences right there in North Carolina, next door to Marcia. Make sure we see you there. All right, I'm done. Bye-bye.
Carrie has put that link in the chat. That was a great infomercial. I think you should do all of TFB's infomercials from now on. I also want to put a link. Mine is not the short link. I apologize, but that is supposed to be the correct link to our registration for the cohort that will continue this conversation. So if you gained anything at all, or you know people who would gain from this and could not be a part of this conversation, the videos will be edited and put in the Equip Peace USA as a part of the cohort. And once we have enough people to start the cohort will go. And these are the kinds of conversations that will continue along with finding spiritual practices that will help us engage in the work, sustain the work, and also being led by an amazing coach that will help guide individuals and the communities into living into this racism work more effectively and just earnestly and respectfully. So our next conversation will be led by Alonzo Johnson at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on October the 13th. So we will have a different panelist and a different facilitator. The questions will be the same, but as you can tell, if you've been here for the first and the second, the whole context changes every time. So share this information with your friends. I'm sure that you all have the Zoom link. Pass it out to as many people as you'd like. We love to have feedback. We love to have the questions. We love to have your presence. And thank you so much for being a part of this.